Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here at the Youth Free Expression Film Contest first workshop, filmmaking workshop. We're so excited. We're going to get started in just a minute as people filter in. Um, while people are joining, I guess I'll introduce myself. My name is Max Cumming. I am a program associate and video producer here at the National Coalition Against Censorship, which is one of the two primary sponsors of the film contest, along with the New York Film Academy. And so, yeah, this is the first of three of these workshops that we're going to be having over the next month or so. This one is about planning your film, otherwise known as pre-production. And so I guess to give you a little bit of a sense of how this is going to work, we're going to go through some of the very basics of pre-production and getting ready to make your own documentary film as a young person, as somebody who maybe doesn't have a ton of experience in filmmaking or with documentary, and assuming that you don't have any special equipment. And we are very fortunate to be joined by some esteemed guests and co-hosts who can share their expertise as well. But yeah, this is totally free and totally for you guys to kind of start exploring filmmaking as a passion and an interest and an advocacy tool as well on top of that. Yeah, I guess we've got about 25 people here. I'm sure more people will filter in, but we've got a lot to get through. So I guess it's time to just dive in. Before we start in earnest, I would like to thank our guest co-hosts. First, Will Thwaites. Will is a documentary filmmaker based in New York who just premiered his first feature-length documentary, Crime and Parody, about people who have been charged with crimes for acts of parody at the Big Sky Documentary Film Festival this past February. Will, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks a bunch for having me.
We are also joined by Andrea Swift. Andrea is a faculty at the New York Film Academy. She is somebody who's been telling cinematic stories for more than 20 years and has served as an executive producer and director of PBS's Emmy-nominated documentary series In the Life. Andrea, thank you so much for joining us and helping co-host the workshops.
I am actually very happy to be here.
Excellent. And I should add that we will have, I and Andrea will sort of host all three of these. And so our most special guest seat, currently filled by Will, is going to be rotated out for each one. So yeah, all right, let's dive in here. Okay, so like I said, this workshop is part of the Youth Free Expression Film Contest. The film contest has been running for over 20 years, but this is the first year we have had the theme be documentary based. The theme is documenting our democracy. So a little bit about that film. We really want you to make movies about your communities and about where you are and people in them, things that are going on in the civic life of your towns or cities. And so that can mean a lot of different things, right? Documenting our democracy, we hope you sort of interpret as broadly and creatively as possible. It's not, we really would encourage you to look beyond just, voting and elections as documentaries, right? Things like local community members who are interesting, right? The fabric of your town, who are the people who are active and engaged? What makes your town unique? What defines living there for you? So we're going to get much deeper into, what should you make your film about? How do you pick a subject? How do you decide who should be in it later on? But as you think about making a film for this contest, think about where you live and what kind of defines the sort of civic or social fabric of the place where you are, and what somebody coming from outside might want to know about it. Some more information about the film contest itself. And I don't know how many people here are here because they want to submit a film to the contest or just because they're interested in learning about filmmaking. Either is fantastic, but I would highly, highly, highly suggest that you submit a film to the contest because not only is making documentaries a ton of fun, and while we are going to do our best to teach you about making them, the real way that you will learn how to make films is by making them and by making mistakes and by going, wow, next time I'm going to do that differently. So this contest is a perfect opportunity to get your feet wet and test out some of the things that you're thinking about and learning about in these workshops. So submissions are open until September 9th, so you have all summer to work on it. It's totally free, just like these workshops. It's open for anyone between the ages of 13 and 19, and it should be 6 minutes or less. And it should include a little tagline at the end saying that it was made for the film contest. But the real good stuff are the prizes. It's free to enter, but if you win first place, you get a $1,000 prize, as well as a scholarship to NYFA, to the New York Film Academy, where you can take a class. And you will also have your film screened in a couple cool places, including the National Coalition Against Censorship annual benefit in November and the National Council of Teachers of English conference, which is a big thing in Philadelphia where thousands of English teachers from all over the country come and meet, and they will see your film. Second place does not get the screenings or the scholarship, but they do get $500, and third place gets $250. So if you catch the filmmaking bug in these workshops and this sounds interesting, or you want to see if you're any good at it, a great way to do that would be to get some friends, make a little short documentary on your phone, and then see if you can get $1,000 for it. So anyway, without further ado, let's move on to the instruction here. Okay, so first up, I would like to introduce the executive director of the National Coalition of Against Censorship, Lee Rowland. Lee is a First Amendment attorney, and she's going to tell us a little bit about the First Amendment and recording in public spaces, as well as why documentary and filmmaking and expressing yourself as an average citizen is actually so important to upholding and defending the First Amendment itself.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad my screen full of money bag emojis cleared before I started talking. That was awesome timing. Welcome, I'm Lee, and I work along with Max and my colleague John Marco, who's helping us on this call at the National Coalition Against Censorship. And as you might imagine, we fight censors and censorship, but we want to make sure that free expression and those values are proactive as well. That is, we're not just reacting when the man tries to shut you down or silence you, but we're actually supporting ways to make expression and embody the free expression values that we believe in and that are in our Constitution. So Max said I'm a First Amendment attorney. I promise I will try and talk like a non-lawyer robot, but please, if I say anything that you have a question about, put it in the chat and I'll do my best to unpack it. So the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which is what I'm a specialist in as a lawyer, protects our freedom of expression broadly. And there are a bunch of rights packed into that First Amendment. There's your freedom of speech, your freedom of religion, freedom of the press or the media, your right to protest, and your right to dissent from government. There's so much in there. And it's really all about the core freedoms that enable us to have our own thoughts, our own beliefs, and then to speak up, even if people in power may not agree with them. When you are using a camera, it's like any other medium of expression. You are sharing your opinions. You are capturing other people. You may show what you make in a film to other people. And hey, sometimes even movies can even change the world, how people think about things. Some movies intentionally are political. Some movies just can change our brain, right? And so what's really beautiful about movies is they really have kind of all those elements of the First Amendment. They allow us to digest our world and believe what we want and witness it and document it and share it with other people, and maybe change things if we want. So movies are this beautiful way that we can exercise those freedoms that we've been given in the Constitution. There are lots of other great ways, of course. You can join a protest. You can write an issue for a newspaper. You can visit your local library, right? There are so many ways that we have these freedoms that we may not even think that we're, oh my God, I'm exercising my constitutional rights right now. You guys may be aware that we think this is a very dangerous time for censorship. We have a federal government that has used its power to silence speech at times. And although time seems to go very fast these days, many of you may remember that earlier this year, there was a crackdown on public protest in Minnesota, in Minneapolis. And a huge part of what was happening was that agents with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, who are with the federal government, or ICE agents, were effectively carrying out raids in the city of Minneapolis. And then they were also trying to target, punish, and threaten people who were witnessing what they were doing. Very specifically, there were community monitors that had phones, right, recording what these ICE agents were doing to hold the government accountable. That action of capturing what public servants are doing in public is at the very core of your First Amendment rights, of all of our First Amendment rights. And anytime an officer or an agent of the government told someone that they couldn't videotape or what they were doing was harmful or even worse, criminal, like obstructing an investigation, they were lying and they were undermining our First Amendment rights. And so I think particularly this year, it's really important to remember that documenting our world is an unbelievably important part of holding the government accountable. That kind of transparency makes it much harder for government abuse and even fascism to take hold. And that's partially why the government was so upset about it, right? Because they recognized the power in witnessing things with our own eyes. Of course, not to go down a rabbit hole. That also has to come with media literacy, so we don't believe every AI video we see online, right? And so in some ways, making a documentary is a radical act of your freedoms because you can share your own point of view. You can tell the truth, right? And especially in an age where there is a lot of artificial intelligence and a lot of things that are not necessarily true that go viral online, shaping something that feels true to you and that can tell people a story isn't just an act of art, it really is an act of democracy. So that was really why we picked the theme this year. I also just want to briefly talk about your First Amendment rights as a filmmaker or as a documentarian. And those are, of course, fancy multi-syllabic words. But anytime you pick up your phone and, take a picture of what's happening in public, you are documenting that world, right? The First Amendment protects that act of taking pictures as a free speech right. And the courts have held, including the Supreme Court, that those rights are basically geographical. That is, how much of a right you have under the First Amendment to take pictures and record your surroundings depends on where you are. So the places where you can pretty much always be, and you can always take your phone out of your pocket and take a picture of something, and there's nothing that anybody can do to you, right? Nobody can tell you that's criminal or that you have to move, is when you're in sidewalks, streets, and public parks. The streets has a little asterisk, which is that as a pedestrian, you also want to obey pedestrian traffic. But protests, for example, have a protected right to block the roadway. And if you're witnessing something, if you are legally standing where you're allowed to be, then you can legally take a picture of anything you see. So public spaces are pretty much always fair game for you as a filmmaker. There are a couple of asterisks and caveats, of course. This is the law after all, so nothing is perfectly straightforward. That's true anytime you just pull out your phone and start filming. There are no asterisks on that. But if you're going to use fancy equipment, there are times where you might need a permit. So for example, if you're using a tripod, and this is not the kind of contest, by the way, where anybody expects you to tripod, but just so you know, or a big bullhorn with really amplified sound, In some cities, you might need a permit for that because it's not kind of normal volume, or you might say obstruct traffic with a tripod. So if you're ever to the point where you're using fancy equipment, congratulations, you are probably well beyond this workshop. You might want to check out local permit rules. But if we're talking about making a documentary with your phone in a place where you're allowed to be, either in a public space or where someone has told you who owns the property, you're allowed to be there and film, you go with God. You're golden. Not only are you making a documentary, you're protected by the Constitution. In private spaces, I already kind of alluded to this. If you have consent to be there and consent to record, that's your golden ticket, right? So public spaces are protected by the Constitution. But for when you're, for example, you probably know this, you can yell all you want about your opinions in your own kitchen, but you can't necessarily go next door and start yelling in your neighbor's kitchen, right? But if your neighbor says, yeah, you can be here and sure, you can record, you're golden. So when you're in private spaces, it's about consent of who controls that space. When you're in public spaces, the government controls it. And because we live in a democracy, we the people are the government. So public spaces are yours to record in. The only really difficult thing in recording, I wish I could kind of give you a more black and white answer, is there are some hiccups with audio recording that don't exist with images. Everything I said is true for images. You have permission to be there. You're in a public space. You can record it. In some states, however, it is illegal to record people without their knowledge or consent where they have an expectation of privacy. So again, if you pull out your phone and record a crowd going by and you're standing in the middle of a public park, that's fine. If you incidentally capture people's, words or volume or crowd noise, that's all fine. But if you're in, let's say, someone's home and you have a right to be there, so you can be taking pictures, right? You're in the living room, but someone's in a bedroom next door and you can kind of hear them through the wall and you record them with your phone, that might be invading their privacy. And really, there's a legal test for this, but it's also kind of a common sense test where someone thinks that they can't be overheard. You shouldn't be capturing that, probably ethically, and in some states legally. You might not be able to use that footage. And then finally, I don't want to go too deep in this because, again, the point of this is to kind of encourage you guys to make what you can in your worlds, make things that are real, make sense to you. So hopefully you're not planning some great heist, right, where you have very complex questions about where you are and who you can record. But as a general matter, you want to be really thoughtful about capturing and displaying people's faces. You have a First Amendment right to take a picture in a public park or a sidewalk and capture somebody walking by and even post that on your Facebook, right? You haven't invaded anyone's privacy. But there are sometimes differences between ethics and the law. So while the First Amendment would protect your ability to take and display that picture, you also want to make sure ethically that you're behaving in a way that doesn't cause harm because you are monitoring and recording even public spaces. So for example, people at a protest, they might take steps to cover their faces because they don't want to be identified with, say, a controversial cause, or because they're afraid of police, or maybe their immigration status is under threat in the country, right? So when you are in spaces where people are vulnerable or that identifying them may cause harm, be really thoughtful about including faces. And as you get into the kind of professional world of film, there are all kinds of consent forms you can use to make sure that you're never kind of exploiting people or making money off of them in ways that would cause you legal risk. So for this contest, this is deeper than you'll ever need. That's a quick primer on First Amendment protecting your right to record. But for this contest, as long as you have permission to be where you are and you're not using crazy fancy equipment, you can capture what you see. And the First Amendment makes sure that's true. And I see Amrita has a question in the chat asking, can I use a gimbal? Generally, yes. A gimbal, as long as it's not so large or long that it's like you're going to whack people with it, you want to be really thoughtful because It's about the size of, say, a cane or an umbrella, right? So generally that kind of device isn't going to need a permit, but just be spatially aware and be knowledgeable about your surroundings so that you don't give anyone reason to say, hey, your filmmaking is causing a problem or an obstruction. But as a formal matter, no, you don't need a permit anywhere that I'm aware of to use a gimbal. So I'll just say we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end, but if anybody has any First Amendment questions that come up for you, we'll have, of course, you're welcome. We'll have 3 of these. So if any of you come back and you end up with any kind of in-depth free speech questions or First Amendment questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thanks so much, Max. I'll toss it back to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Lee. Okay, so now that we have learned that as documentarians, we are the guardians of our constitutional rights and also gotten a legal crash course on how to use those rights safely, let's go back to a simpler question. What is a documentary? The film critic Bill Nichols describes documentary as, quote, a filmmaking practice, a cinematic tradition, and mode of audience reception that remains a practice without clear boundaries. Now, that's very vague. So what does that actually mean? Well, I actually think that the fact that that's very vague is a good thing and indicative of what documentaries actually are. Because documentary is very broad and there are no hard limits to what does and does not count as a documentary, which to me, I think is an invitation to be creative. So documentaries are fact-based, they are factual, but they are also artistic, right? They're not just an article. They're not just a news report most of the time. They usually have a narrative or a story, and they often express a point of view. And so when you combine all of these things, you have a kind of unique opportunity to make a point and express your point of view on an issue or a subject, but also to do so in a non-fiction way, right? By showing people what is actually happening rather than by kind of inventing your own story. And for whatever reason, that resonates more with people. It can very often have a deeper sort of impact on the viewer because they know that what they are seeing actually happened, that they are not watching actors in all likelihood, or at least those actors are reenacting something that did happen. So documentary is pretty unique, I think, as a genre or a filmmaking style. I guess on that note, now I would like to go through a few different subgenres of documentary. The first one we have here is a participatory documentary, which is one that includes the filmmakers and the filmmaking process and the film itself, or calls attention to the way that the filmmakers are kind of influencing the events themselves. So I have a clip here from Minding the Gap, which came out in 2018, which is a participatory documentary.
I'm making this film because of myself and your story.
I always felt like I didn't fit in with my family.
My parents ran this very controlling house. I ran away a lot.
Skateboarding is more of a family than my family.
How did you get disciplined?
I mean, well, they call it child abuse now, but...
Life might be moving too fast. We have to fully grow up, and it's gonna suck.
When you're a kid, you just do, you just act. And then somewhere along the line, everyone loses that.
I knew you had some huge weight on you. Skateboarding meant more to you. It was kind of a life or death thing.
I remember hearing screaming coming from your room, and it was like really, really unnerving.
One of the last things I said to my dad was that I hate you.
You can't just have a child and abandon them. Life doesn't work like that.
I just don't want him to grow up like me. I just want to hide. I just want to run away. That's what the drinking is about.
Maybe you're right. Maybe I need to just move on.
I wish you could. I wish that I can do over.
I could seriously be on the verge of having a mental breakdown, but as long as I'm able to go skate, I'm completely fine.
Great. So, Andrea, you suggested Minding the Gap. Do you want to sort of talk a little bit about why you like it so much and why you think it's such a powerful example of documentary in general and maybe participatory documentary in particular?
I love talking about this film. Thanks for asking. So, and I thought it would be good for you guys to see for a few reasons. One, it's about people that are not too far away from your age. And sometimes we don't think, I don't know, when we're kids growing up, that we matter or we have stories that are important. And I hope that one of the things you'll consider is making movies about you and your friends and things that happen at your age. You don't have to try to become some adult journalist to make a documentary. Number two, Bing Liu made this. He got it in the can for $250. Sorry, in the can means it comes from film when you shot it and then it was in the can. So he finished the production for $250. Then he did a cut, and then he went to a place where Will once worked called Cartemquin Films and got a little grant for $2,500. And then he got it far enough along that he, made it to people who would give him big money and finish the film. So it's also one of those things that just reminds us, like, he just had a little consumer camera. You could have the same thing with your phone, and he just started making a documentary. And I hope he will be an inspiration for you guys in that respect.
Great. Thank you, Andrea. Okay, so our next documentary style example is kind of almost the opposite of a participatory documentary in many ways. An observational documentary, or cinéma vérité if you want to be extremely pretentious about it, and cinéma vérité if you want to be a little bit less pretentious. Cinéma vérité, or an observational doc, is one that does not have intervention from the filmmaker and attempts to portray events exactly as they happened, without kind of interviews or reflecting the filmmaking process on screen. It's a very common style of documentary, especially in the last 50, 60 years. You have definitely seen plenty of these. So the example of this that we have is Harlan County, USA from 1976, which is about West Virginia coal miners striking to get a union. So here's a little clip.
They're treating us like that we're animals, dogs. Well, we aren't. We're American citizens. And they are violating their constitutional rights when they tell us that we can't have the union of our choice that those men voted in. If you looked on TV the other day, you seen women going up there, men, impeach Nixon, impeach Nixon. But you let us get up there with protest signs against Duke Power, and they're sending their gun thugs to intimidate us.
Tax money in Kentucky at work, breaking the organized labor. Organized labor. Organized labor.
Well, hell, I don't think they're in here for anything except break the strike here. They're for the company all the way.
Scabs wouldn't be up there if the state trooper.
I don't have any feelings one way or the other. Just have a job like this.
And why are you here?
Keep the roads open, enforce laws, keep the peace, try to keep people from getting hurt.
Put your hands on me, Hawk. Bailey. I know my name's Bailey. You're a damn disgrace to the Bailey family.
Boy, this is a damn shame. Well, Bailey, you're a state cop. They got a shame.
You ought to get a shot of something, get a shot of this baby hanging on. That's what I've been looking at.
It's the same diameter as this right here.
What's a scab? There are no healing for a scab, you know?
Yeah, that's some of their fun. That's some of their fun. The damn God brought that gun on me right there. Right there, you son of a bitch.
the kind of goddamn noise. Hey, I'm tired of these. Yeah, what men? These young people rare. That sucker while I'm Frank, you too, family.
Hey! What the hell do you think you're doing? Thanks for picking
Gabbing back. Go on, sucky. Hey, go on, hey, go on. Excuse me, help with my hand. Goddamn bastard.
All you guys on this injunction, all 36 of you, remember this. It's court order. You can't block the traffic, and don't call them scabs. Because if you do, you'll be down there behind bars.
I don't think you'll never win a strike by having 6 people on the picket line. There's no way, that you can win a strike with 6 pickets, so you got to violate these injunctions. And the lawyers are made to get you out of trouble after you get in, not to get you out of trouble before you get in.
I'll put it like this. You do what you want to do.
Right. Oops, nope, not going back into that. So that was Harlan County, USA. I highly recommend you watch the rest of the film. As you may have noticed, I attempted to turn the subtitles on, but Google's auto captioning can't handle those hill country accents. So if you want to protect yourself from AI, just head to the hills. Okay.
Max, that was the best thing I've ever heard about lawyers. Sorry, I just had to say that. That was such a great clip.
Okay, so our next example here is a little bit less colorful, I will say, but very informational. This is an expository documentary. This is like the kind of classic, documentary you might think about, where it's highly researched and scripted. You're interviewing experts. You have like a voiceover and old photos and videos and maybe a reenactment and like maps and things like that. You've definitely seen these in like social studies class and stuff. And so I have an example of the king of these documentaries, just a short clip from his most recent series on the American Revolution by Ken Burns. Here he's talking about George Washington.
On July 2nd, 1775, Private Phineas Ingalls of Andover, Massachusetts, noted in his diary that it rained and that a new general from Philadelphia had arrived in Cambridge. That new general was George Washington of Virginia, the commander of the Continental Army the Congress in Philadelphia had just created. His arrival meant that the New England War, in which Phineas Ingalls and his fellow militiamen had joined, was about to become an American war.
Washington is a figure toward whom people naturally turn for leadership. It is clear by the time the Continental Army is signed into being in the late spring of 1775 that its commander-in-chief can be nobody else. There's something about his presence that makes him the inescapable choice.
Keep doing that. So yeah, again, you're probably familiar with that kind of style. Okay, so last but not least here,
Max, real quick, can I say something about that one and the last one real fast? Sorry, yes. I got excited. I've been brimming to say something here. You can't silence a filmmaker. No. What I think is really cool about watching those 2 clips back to back, the clip that you just saw from Ken Burns, that was a little bit more something you'd watch in your social studies class, and then it's Harlan County, USA, the one before that, right? What's interesting about watching those 2 clips back to back is that in some ways, they have every piece of what makes up a documentary in them. The tools that you guys that have at your disposal for making these things. And it's stuff like interviewing people, right? In that last clip, you hear interviews from people where you can kind of set up a camera and ask someone a question about the Revolutionary War or the Civil War, right? So there's one thing. You've got interviews at your disposal. You've got B-roll at your disposal, right? So those first couple shots that you saw that were like rain going against a window or trees in a misty valley, right? You've got B-roll at your disposal. And then Harlan County, USA, that film that we watched just before this one, that cinema verite, that fancy word that Max used, what that is just like filming people in their everyday lives without kind of messing with it. You just kind of like go follow them doing what they're doing and sort of see what those interactions look like. And in some ways, those three tools, interviews, B-roll, and cinema verite, following people around in their everyday lives, those are like really the fundamentals of making a documentary. And you can pair them in all sorts of interesting ways. Sure, there's other things. Voiceover, like you heard in that last one, and archival materials that you could add in there. But in a lot of ways, like the fundamentals of a documentary are interviews, B-roll, and cinema verite.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Will. And as you might notice, as we go through some of these examples, there's totally overlap between styles, and we are kind of presenting them as these different buckets, but that's not how it actually works, right? They're all just documentaries, and they all just kind of incorporate different elements and components. And so I guess to sort of put a finer point on that idea that documentary is just kind of whatever you make it, we have our last style here, experimental documentary, which is kind of just everything else. Experimental documentaries are documentaries that don't fit into the sort of typical mold. They might not have any words. They might not have a story. They may be nonlinear. They may not even be true. I love Bob Dylan, and one of my favorite Bob Dylan documentaries is Martin Scorsese's documentary about the Rolling Thunder Review Tour, and like 20% of that is just made up. And like they're telling that it's not like he is trying to lie to you. It's just like Bob Dylan's a weird guy, and some of it's not true. But you know what? That still counts as a documentary. So for our final clip here, we have a little segment from a movie called Inquiring Nuns that Will turned me on to. I'd never heard of it before. So let's watch this.
We're asking this afternoon one simple question of people. Are you happy?
Gosh, what a question. Well, in what context? Am I professionally happy? Am I personally happy?
Let's take...
Am I religiously happy?
Do they all go together for you or no? No. Or sort of a state?
No, they don't go together. I think I'm, professionally, perpetually dissatisfied. I could be because I want to do better. Personally, I'm happy. I'd like to have peace in Vietnam. In that sense, I'm unhappy. But I can't. How can you ask a person to throw everything into one category?
You think that's unfair?
No, I don't think it's an unfair question. I think it's an irrelevant question.
Well, we're trying to see what makes people happy. Now, some of those things are the things that make you unhappy, and success in one phase would make you happier.
I don't know. I don't want to quibble. I don't want to pick nits. But I think it's very difficult to. When I wake up in the morning and read a paper and I don't know, Senator Hartke makes sense on Vietnam, then I feel the.
You feel happier, or you feel pleased?
Well,
or is there a difference?
In that regard, what Hartke says is an intellectual happiness, and pleasure.
Is happiness something that you're searching for in life?
No. Satisfaction, maybe I would use that word. Happiness is a word like conformity, like togetherness. I shy away from. I try not to.
What about happiness in the relation to other people?
Oh, again, I would use the word pleasure. I just, happiness has become such a societal word. People say happiness is a warm puppy. People say happiness is a blanket, and happiness is far too complicated a subject to bandy around. So you
keep it as something special, not trivial.
Yeah. It's very important. and consequently very hard to define.
Do you think that's why you're not seeking it?
Perhaps. I don't know, maybe I probably haven't been any help.
All right. So Will, what was that, and why do you find it so compelling?
Yeah, I mean, some of what we're trying to do here is demystify the idea of a documentary, make it seem really simple. Because you watch some of those earlier clips, and I don't know, if I was 15 years old, I might think, how the heck am I going to make Harlan County, USA? How the heck am I going to make a Ken Burns documentary? But you watch a clip like that, Inquiring Nuns, made in like 1960 something by a couple of young filmmakers in Chicago, Gordon Quinn being one of them. And you go like, oh, it's just a TikTok. Like a documentary can be as simple as a TikTok video, right? Like it can be as simple as going out onto the street and asking someone a kind of interesting question and seeing what their reaction to it is. Like, what is democracy? Or who did you vote for? Or what do you think about XYZ politics? Like a documentary can be a really simple thing. And when thinking about what a documentary is, like to me, the most simple version of it is it's you with a camera filming real life, asking questions. And those questions can be literal, like on the street, like those nuns were. Are you happy? Or they can be more figurative, right? Your whole film can be about what's the meaning of life without ever asking that question, what's the meaning of life? And so a camera, real life, and questions are kind of what make up a documentary to me. And I think the last thing that that clip shows you is you want those questions to make people a little bit uncomfortable. Not a lot uncomfortable, but just a little bit uncomfortable. You don't want to ask people, I don't know, something as like third rail and hot button is like, how do you feel about abortion? That might make people feel turned off. But if you ask someone like, have you ever been in love? Like that makes people just enough uncomfortable that like you might get some really interesting answers. And so I think that's one other thing to chase as you guys think about your documentaries. Not what's easy, but what makes you just a little bit uncomfortable, what makes the people that you're filming a little bit uncomfortable. And I think that's where like truth and like ideas come from, just like a little bit uncomfortable. Are you happy?
Absolutely. Thank you, Will. Okay, so as we move into the back half of our first workshop here, now that we have definitively answered the question, what is a documentary? Let's start talking about how to make them, how to get ready to make one. First, as you are thinking about what you need, what kind of equipment you need, I'm just going to run through the very basics. Okay, so here we have a list of the absolute essentials. And number one on this list, and not coincidentally, is friends. You need friends to make a documentary, or at least people who will tolerate you. It helps if they have also made documentaries or are interested in it, but I have made a documentary with people who I kind of begrudgingly convinced to do it. Any kind of friend at all who is willing to suffer you telling them what to do is going to be just fine. Second, the second most important thing you need is a camera. Whatever camera you have access to is great. If that is a $30,000 professional cinema camera, that's awesome. Be careful. But in the very likely event that it is not that, and it is maybe like an old DSLR or a camcorder or even just your phone, that's fine too. And that is absolutely gonna do you super great work in this contest and for the foreseeable future. So don't worry too much about camera quality. The mark of an amateur filmmaker is somebody who thinks that they're gonna make a great film because they just spent a bunch of money on a camera. Next up, we have microphones. Microphones and audio are very important. And this is not our sort of production workshop. That'll be in a couple of weeks. We'll tell you more about that later. So I'm not going to go too deep into any of this stuff here. We will touch more on it later. But suffice to say that you should think about how you're going to record sound. It's not too hard these days to get a pretty good video picture. But if you're just using the microphone in your cell phone and you're standing 15 feet away from somebody, it's probably not going to sound great. And when you're watching something that doesn't have great sound, you notice it immediately, and it seems kind of low quality. So right now, as we're in pre-production, I would advise you to just kind of keep this in mind. And in a couple weeks, tune back in and we will have more specific advice about how to handle your microphone conundrum and your audio thing. Now, okay, so the third and final kind of like fundamental, you absolutely need it to make a documentary, is some kind of editing software, right? And again, this can range all the way from Avid Media Composer or DaVinci Resolve or Adobe Premiere Pro, you know, the high-end stuff that the pros use that takes a long time to figure out how to use and troubleshoot, and it wants you to like do everything in exactly the right professional way. Or you can use, you know, iMovie, which comes pre-installed on every Mac, or you can use, I don't know, does Windows Movie Maker still exist? Or, I mean, there are certainly plenty of editing software you can get on your phone and for free. Even DaVinci Resolve, if you want to try the more advanced stuff, has a great free option that you can put on a computer. But yes, editing software is absolutely necessary, but like a camera, doesn't have to be very fancy. And this we will cover in our third and final workshop about post-production. So, Will, could you tell me a little bit about, you know, maybe quickly run through these 4 bullets here and describe your first filmmaking experience and what you settle on for each of these?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so the first one, Friends, like for this project, if you decide to make a documentary for this competition and you've got someone else that's interested in filmmaking, just like you be the director, they be the producer. Who cares what that means? Who cares how those division of responsibilities shake out? But it's nice to have a teammate to try to figure out how to get things done. If you don't have a friend like I didn't growing up, then like maybe you can make it alone and that's totally okay too. But it does help when you've got teammates floating around out there. Camera wise, I mean, Max sort of already said it, but the camera you have is the best one for making a documentary. So like if everyone's got phones out there, just use your phone because you already know how to use it. A lot of times with equipment, you don't want to end up using stuff that's so complicated that it gets in the way of the real moments that you want to capture. You just want to use the thing that helps you get as close to interesting moments and interesting people as possible. I would say the only caveat to that is turn it this way, right? Like instead of doing your sort of vertical videos that you might be posting on Instagram, turn it widescreen and already you become a documentary filmmaker. Sound, like Max said, is weirdly the most important thing, like almost more important than video. That like documentaries are so much easier to watch when the sound is good. And that could mean using an external microphone. When I'm out there making little videos, I have some of those influencer mics, DJI, I forget what they're called, but the sorts of things that you'd see Logan Paul clip on himself and talk into just to get a little bit better audio. That's kind of nice. And you can do man on the streets with those if you happen to have them. But if not, and you wanted to interview someone or you were getting audio that was really important to you, maybe try to find a quiet space. Like instead of interviewing someone in Times Square, interview them in an alley just off of Times Square, or find a nice quiet place in your house to ask a couple questions and get the camera kind of close to them so that it's picking up nice, clean audio, and that'll make your life a lot easier down the road. So keep audio in mind just as much as video when you're making these things. And then the last thing is editing. It's probably the most intimidating part of making a documentary. But in a weird way, it's the most important part because what a documentary filmmaker does is think everything in the world is interesting. And then they get home and they look at the footage and realize only 3% of what they shot actually mattered, right? You go out and you film a protest that ends up being 3 hours long. And the moment that you end up using is when like some of those protesters had a conflict with the police that showed up to shut it down, right? That's the moment that you really want to get included in your documentary. And really the only way to do that is to figure out how to edit. And so that could be as simple as jumping on iMovie on your Macs, if that still exists, or there's even stuff on your phone. I think like, what is it called? CapCut or something like that. Figure out what the kids are using on Instagram and TikTok and edit your documentaries that way if need be. But yeah, editing all of your footage that you think is going to be really interesting and ends up being not that interesting down into the most interesting parts, that's going to be the core of making a good documentary.
Absolutely. Yes. And like I said, we will go into more specifics about all of these things in future workshops, including more specific recommendations for what to use and how to use it. So if this seems intimidating, don't worry, because we'll come back. Okay. So now that we know what a documentary is, and we have, or at least are thinking about what we need to have in order to create one, we need a story. We need a subject. We need something to film in this documentary. So how do you figure that out? How do you know what ought to be in your documentary? And the most basic answer is it should be something that is interesting to you, because if you don't care about it, if you don't find it interesting, if you don't think that other people should know about it, then there's no chance that any third-party viewer is going to watch it and be compelled by it. So documentary is a really great opportunity to think about things that you're into that are maybe kind of weird or don't seem as interesting to other people, and try to explain what it is that you find so compelling about this thing. Access. You should choose a documentary subject idea that you can actually make a documentary about, right? So I think it would be awesome to make a documentary about why the president skipped his son's wedding this weekend, and whether we're going to go to war with Cuba or back to war with Iran, or whether he just doesn't really like his son. But I don't know the president or anyone who does know him, so I can't do that. But I do know a rancher out in western Montana, because I lived out there for a couple of years. And so that's what the documentary I'm currently working on is about. So that is a huge thing. And if you know somebody who's kind of strange or interesting or compelling, or you know, a local guy who no one outside of your community would know about, but who you have an established relationship with and has something interesting about him, that's a great place to look. So Andrea, as you think about this idea, you know, what makes for a good documentary topic? How do you think about that? What is your view on this question here?
I mean, I think just about anything. What you said is, I think, the most important. Do you care? Are you passionate about it? And do you have a question about it? Like, why tell the story? Why go into it? What is it that matters to you that you want to explore? If it's alive for you, it's probably going to be alive for the people that you watch. I want to, this is a little bit broader of an idea, but I think it's really important. I've taught literally over 1,000 students, many of whom were your age. I've watched them. I always teach by people making movies, and that's how they learn how to make movies. So I've watched thousands of movies be made. And I can tell you that there is one really clear, absolute emerging rule about making a documentary, about being a documentary filmmaker. The only way to be a documentary filmmaker is to make a documentary. Rule number one, make the movie. It's okay if you don't know how. You don't know how? Great. Make a movie. You're not confident? Cool. Make a movie. You're pretty sure it's going to be a mess? Fantastic. Make a movie. Make the mess. Like, just don't let anything stop you. Sometimes we think that trying to walk into a situation where the camera is going to slam the doors closed, and that this becomes really intimidating. What can I do? And one thing that I've seen really consistently over 20 years is cameras don't shut doors, they open them. Like, you can't necessarily walk up to somebody that you don't know and say, hey, I want to come hang out in your house and learn about your life and know what it means to be you. Who's going to say yes to that? But if you walk up and say, I want to make a little documentary about this, it's amazing how many doors open. I mean, I've watched students walk into really interesting worlds. So I think one question is, who do you want to know about? What world do you want to explore? What questions do you have? Don't try to think of something cool. Try to think of what do I really want to spend my time exploring? I'm done.
Max, I was thinking a little bit about this. So there's three kind of key things on this slide: ideas, story, and character. Like those are kind of the fundamentals that Max is talking about here. And I make documentaries for a living. And as a filmmaker that makes them for a living, the most important thing is story. Story is the thing that we always talk about. Story, story, story. Weirdly, in this context, I think it's the least important of those three things. That for you all that are going out there to try to make a film that's manageable, that you can wrap your mind around, that you can execute here in the next couple of months with an iPhone and no microphone, weirdly, the easiest way to do that is find a character. Find a weirdo that lives in your neighborhood. Find the pastor at your church who's been preaching there for 30 years. Find your uncle who was in the Vietnam War and has stories about that. Find the woman who's running for councilwoman in your neighborhood where you are. Like, a character in a lot of ways is the most tangible entry point to making a documentary and a story, because it's so simple. You find someone that you're interesting and you ask them kind of questions about who you are. And so in a lot of ways, like, if you were going to choose one of these three things to focus on when making a short film, I might say think about character first, because some of story is implicit in you, because like stories are really complicated once you really get into the mechanics of how they work. But when you don't even think about it, you kind of naturally gravitate towards a story where if you did interview your uncle about Vietnam, and he started going like, yeah, I remember the first day we got to Vietnam and we were in brand new boots that didn't have any mud on them and nice clean shirts that didn't have any mud on them. And in the first 6 minutes, they were torn to shreds and there was mud everywhere and there was guns flying, blah, blah, blah. Like, that's a story, right? That has like all the things in it that I would chase as a professional filmmaker. That's like stakes and ideas and characters and tension and conflict, blah, blah. Who cares? Like, you naturally gravitate towards all of those things that are really easy place to start is like finding a character. And weirdly, again, even though like for a living, I think story is the most important thing, ideas might be your second easiest entry point here. That if you found a big idea that you cared about, it might be easy to ask people questions about that thing. Just like those nuns did, like, are you happy, right? Happiness is an idea, and you could go interview a bunch of people about happiness. Democracy is an idea. You could go out on the street right now and ask people like, do you care about democracy? And like, weirdly, when you ask that question about climate change or the war in Iran or democracy as a whole or free expression, like, embedded in those questions that you ask and the answers that you're going to get are going to be stories. They're going to be the little anecdote that stands out to you, that someone sort of says like, yeah, like, you want to ask me about climate change? Actually, like, I grew up on an oil farm in Texas, and like, it was the lifeblood of my family. And every day we would go out and work on the oil fields. Like, that's an anecdote. That's the thing that's going to add up to a story in the movie that you're trying to make. But in some ways, that word story is like the least accessible of these three things. If I were you all, I would chase a character and I would chase ideas and try to let your sort of like impulses figure out the story part of this thing.
Well, Will, you have successfully anticipated where we're going here, because next up we have all about story, right? How do you know how to plan what's a narrative, a story, when you don't know what's going to happen? And the short answer is you don't. So as Will said, for the purposes of this contest, less than 6 minutes, and as sort of young novice filmmakers, you fortunately don't have to worry too much about story, just because it's very hard to kind of have like a narrative with a beginning, middle, and end in that short time frame. And instead, you can kind of create a short film that is more of a snapshot or a portrait or a profile of a person, right? Or an idea, let's say. And yes, as Will said, the sort of fundamental elements or components of story will sort of just naturally emerge to you, especially as you're editing. What is interesting? What is compelling? Where is there tension and emotion in what this person is saying or this person's life? So yes, for this contest, story can take a bit of a back seat, but I do think that we would be a little remiss if we didn't at least touch on it, at least for posterity's sake and for the future as you continue your, no doubt, soon-to-be illustrious filmmaking careers. creating a story or a narrative when you're also making a documentary is very difficult because you need to be able to kind of set up what's going to happen at the end in the beginning of a story, right? Any story, needs to pay off what happens in the beginning with the conclusion. And yet, because it's real life, because it's happening in front of you, you don't actually know what's going to happen. And so you could guess. But part of the fun of documentary filmmaking is constantly having these plans or ideas about how you're going to arrange everything being foiled. And then you have to go back to the drawing board and go, well, damn, I had this whole big idea about how I was going to end the film. And then we went down a total, left turn. And now all of that is just out the window. And this is a totally different thing. And there are a lot of really fantastic documentaries that come out of that, where a filmmaker goes to a place or starts talking to a person and they want to make one thing, and then they stumble across an idea or something that's happening, and they totally drop the first idea and they run with the new one, and that becomes an Academy Award winning film. But I guess my one piece of advice would be that like I said, you always want to be thinking about, like, how might I be able to fit this together? And also thinking specifically, what am I going to be glad that I shot now when I'm done shooting and when I'm in the edit, right? And so thinking about, like, let me get this reaction shot, or let me ask about this thing, trying to kind of cover as many bases as you can within reason, that will set you up to be able to then go back in the edit and kind of assemble that story in a way that will make sense. So I don't know. I mean, Will, you just sort of spoke about story a lot, and I don't want to overwhelm people, but I do want to hear, even just for my own sake, like, how do you do this? How do you actually, as a professional filmmaker, start working on a story, given that you don't know what'll happen?
Yeah, well, there's two little anecdotes or ideas that jump to mind for me here. There's a quote, I pulled it up so I get it right, from a man named E.M. Forster, and he defines a story as, what he says is, a story can only have one merit, that of making the audience want to know what happens next. That, like, the key to a story is suspense, where you want the audience to just keep watching, right? Like, you guys have watched an episode of Law and Order. You want to find out, like, who the killer is. You've watched the Olympics. You want to find out who wins the gold. Like, a story can only have one merit, that of making the audience want to know what happens next. And I think for you all, at the level that you're going to be operating, it could be as simple as just, like, what's interesting, and then what's interesting, and then what's interesting, and then what's interesting, right? Like, both yourself as you're doing that over the process of making this film, and then as you're editing it, like, all right, well, what would the audience want to know? And then what would the audience want to know? And then what might the audience want to know? So that's one way to think about it. One other way to think about it that I think is simple but gets complex after that is, there's a couple fundamentals of a story. And I think the two simplest ones to think about are a character that has a goal, right? Like, if you only thought of two things, it was a character that has a goal, right? And so that could be a political candidate that was running for office. That could be a football player that was trying to win the championship. That could be a protester that wants change in their community, right? A character with a goal, in some ways, is the easiest way to build the suspense that I'm talking about, because you want to find out what happens. Do they win the championship? Do they win the election? Do they get change in their community? And so if you're trying to make a story in the most simple way possible, to me, I feel like the way to do it is find a character that has a goal. And that's kind of the simplest way to tell a story. I don't know. What do you think, Andrea?
I completely agree. I'd put just a little bit more of a frame around that, since you've done that part. I think it's really good to remember that a story is something that happens. That if what you're doing is pursuing a story, and the other kind that Max talked about could just be more informational, but we're talking now about you're doing one that's more of a story. Just remember, you're looking for a thing that happens. So it's not what somebody thinks. It's not their ideas. It's not an argument. It's a thing that, I mean, it could be, if the argument is two people arguing, then that's a thing that happens. But if it's somebody just proposing an argument for the way they see things politically, that's a fine thing, but it's not a story. And the reason it happens is because a character has a goal, and the story is them pursuing that goal. I think you want to make sure that you're going to get to the end. Like Will was just talking about the whole time the story, they're going to be asking the question, what's going to happen? And you need to answer it at the end. It's like telling a joke without a punchline. If you don't have somewhere that you're going for. So when you're looking at something, if you had, like, we had a student who wanted to make a film about their roommate who was an actor who came to make it in New York, and their goal was to make it in New York, and that was the film they wanted to make. Well, how do you know, at what moment are they making it in New York? Is it when they get a Tony? Is it when they get their first job? Is that going to happen Saturday? Because they have to shoot right now. So what might happen, this week? And they brought it all the way down to the woman was English was not her first language. She was from another country, and her biggest challenge that she had identified was to speak in an American accent. And so she had an audition in which she had to speak in an American accent. And there was this one day that they could follow her from getting the last bit of coaching to going in for the audition. They couldn't go into the audition, but her coming back out crying. And you get to the end. You don't know that she's made it in New York, but this little movement of trying to make it in New York has happened. So you want something that you're actually going to get to the end of in the time frame that you have.
One other thought I have, we've got time, Max, here, is like, a lot of people hear this phrase, like a story has a beginning, middle, and end. Like that's a phrase that will get trotted out in high school and middle school. I always hated it because I never understood what it actually meant. Like it just seems so arbitrary, like a beginning, middle, and end. What does that mean? But I will say, like, if you do end up making a documentary that's more about ideas, that if you were just going to make an ideas piece about democracy, if you were literally going to go out on the street and ask people what democracy meant to them, think about that beginning, middle, and end thing, is that like you just want your documentary to have three different things. That like you want it to start off funny, like someone might have a funny answer that's like, free expression to me means getting to swear online, right? And like then it's like the documentary kind of starts off funny, right? And then your second group of people sort of says like, to me, free expression means like I was an immigrant to this country and I couldn't speak freely in my home country. And now here I'm America, like I can vote and I can say whatever I want on the streets and I can swear at politicians and blah, blah, blah. And then like the last person in your thing would sort of say something bigger, that like free expression is the core of what this country is built on, that like America falls apart without free expression, right? That like the only time that beginning, middle, and end thing is useful to me is when I think about it as like, just give your thing three things. If it's going to be about an idea, just make it funny and then make it serious and then make it big and reflective at the end. And that's a way to sort of tell a story without having a character that has a goal. Cause like, time constraints, like you might not find a politician by September that's going to have an election in November. So like, just keep in mind that if you can't find a character with a goal, just make it three things: funny, serious, reflective.
It's a great way to think about it, Will. Thank you. Okay, so on that note of character, let's talk a little bit more about the idea of a documentary subject or your primary character, which if you do kind of have a character, that is going to be the sort of heart of your film, unless you're doing that kind of ideas piece that Will is talking about, and how to kind of pick a subject. And as you know, we've talked about this already, but your subject should be somebody who's compelling to your audience, right? Somebody that your audience wants to know about or wants to hear from, or is funny or tragic. And so there's a certain sense in which like your film is going to kind of, and the emotion in your film is going to run through this person. And so you want to kind of think through that, and what is going to be interesting. So I don't know, Andrea, do you have thoughts about what makes a subject compelling, or somebody who should have a film made about them, or you as a filmmaker want to make a film about?
Some of it is just like the je ne sais quoi. I mean, who is somebody you just can't look away from? Who is somebody that you are drawn to, that you want to know what they have to say, that you want to see what's going to happen? There's a bit of it that's just from your gut. I think if you're trying to test it beyond that, this character, I mean, do they have a goal? And if they don't have something they're trying to do, or if they're not telling you a story about when they had something they're trying to do, not much is going to happen. It's hard to be engaged. And if they do have a goal, you want to look for where they have obstacles, what's getting in their way, because you want something that really matters to them. If you have somebody who wants something really bad and they might not get it, that's a pretty good recipe for people being interested in them and starting to get engaged in what it is they're trying to do. So some of it's just seeing who's at that stage, in their life. And remember that the stakes don't have to be, war. The stakes just have to be important to the character. I remember watching the National Spelling Bee one night. I was on location. I came back to the hotel and I was just flipping around trying to find something before I went out to dinner. And these 10-year-old kids are in DC spelling words. By the time they've gotten there, they're such good spellers that they're having to be challenged with words that are 4 feet long and nobody's used in 100 years. Could there be anything less important to the world than whether or not a 10-year-old kid can spell a word nobody will ever use? It was riveting. I ended up calling out from dinner, ordering room service, and watched it, just utterly because it mattered so much to them. Then I figured out it was on ESPN, which, fun fact, is the most expensive television real estate in the world. So there were enough people who had the same experience I did that I cannot turn the channel because this matters so much to this 10-year-old, that we stayed. So look for somebody that wants something really bad and may not get it.
Yeah, I think Max kind of alluded to this already, but in this case, character, you can demystify the word. Like the colloquial definition is the right definition to use here, which is when your mom says oh, Uncle Tim is such a character. That's literally what you're looking for, right? Like someone with a big personality is a great character. And you don't have to think much beyond that. Like the definition that I use for character is someone with easily identifiable personality traits. That they're a curmudgeon, that they're enthusiastic, that they're a great dancer, and then those personality traits might pay off over the course of the story. That something about them being hard-headed ends up paying off in minute 4 of the documentary, even though you learn about them in minute 1. But I think this one is an easy one to just sort of go when my mom says so and so is a big character, that's exactly who I'm looking for to make my documentary about.
Absolutely. So for Andrea, yes, please go ahead.
I just wanted to add one thing. If you're doing an interview-driven documentary, if you're not waiting for something to happen in real life, like in verite, you want to follow something that happens in real life. If you're doing interviews, you're probably going to be talking about things that have already happened. If your point is being story-driven. So then the other thing that would really be helpful is if they're a good storyteller.
For sure. So this is our last sort of, note that we have prepared for you to discuss. And after this, we have time for some questions and maybe some just miscellaneous advice. But these two kind of questions we have here, I guess, we're already sort of talking about the first one. What should you think about when choosing a subject? But for the second one, how do you approach a subject? How do you go to somebody and ask them to be in your film? I mean, Andrew, you've already sort of, you mentioned this earlier, that cameras open doors and that asking somebody to be in your documentary is a little bit easier and less awkward than asking them to just kind of tell you their life story, off camera. But what is your advice for people who maybe have an idea of who might be good to make a film about, but they're not sure about how to go about that, especially as somebody between the ages of 13 and 19?
Remember, it's a huge compliment to tell somebody that you find them interesting enough that you want to make your documentary about them, that you want to listen to them, and that you think their stories matter. So I think it's not necessarily a favor you're asking for. You're asking to have a conversation with somebody who's going to probably benefit as much from it as you are. So you don't have to come in from the point of view of like favor seeking. However, depending on who it is, they may want to just do you a favor. I mean, it's been fascinating to me to watch over the years these kids who will show up, particularly for our short-term programs. They may land on Monday with jet lag, trying to move from their native language into English and learn how to use a camera. And on Saturday, they have to shoot their first documentary. And when I first laid that out, I was like, this is never going to work. It works. It's amazing. They just would walk up to people they did not know in a park and say, I have to shoot a documentary on Saturday. Could it please be about you? And in a weird way, that lowers the stakes for everybody because it's like, oh, they're not trying to, like, I don't have to ask her this question of like, why? What do you want to know? What do I need to be worried about? Instead, it's just like, I'm going to help a kid, make a documentary.
And Andrea, can I add, I agree so much. And I just want to say that your youth is also a huge benefit. I know I've been asked, by random people in the street, I have a question for you, or I work in Manhattan, right? And there's foot traffic and actually people with cameras all the time. And I'm such a New Yorker, I just walk by. But the few times I've got, on the way to work, it's usually because it's a younger person with a question. And I really want to emphasize again what you said earlier, Andrea, about how you pick a topic or something like it should interest you, right? You should want to sit with that because your subject can tell. Right? If you're asking them a question you actually care about the answer to, somebody's far more likely to respond to you, whether that's someone who is complimenting you because they think you're interesting, or even if you're a stranger because they can tell you find the subject matter interesting. And the person you're talking to can tell. If you care and you're curious, they're going to want to talk to you. It's infectious.
It's going to be like that spelling bee kid.
Yeah.
Will, do you have thoughts about or stories about how you kind of approached people to be in your film? I mean, crime and parody, I imagine that could be a little bit touchy, especially because there are legal questions possibly involved.
Yeah, I mean, so I made this documentary recently called Crime and Parody that's about this amateur comedian that got thrown in jail for making fun of his local police department. And so it's a story that's really on brand for this session about democracy. Like, it gets to the heart of free expression. Here was a guy expressing himself online that ended up in county jail for 4 days and was on trial for a felony that carried up to 18 months in prison. But I will say, in terms of choosing a subject, it's actually relevant here because the main character in Crime and Parody is a guy named Anthony Novak, who grew up 2 miles from me. Like, I grew up in the town where this whole documentary takes place, and Anthony and I are 1 year apart. Like, we almost went to high school together. And because of that, it made making Anthony to be a part of a documentary a lot easier. And I think there's a lesson in that here, which is, while you should you should stretch to try to make the most interesting documentary about the most interesting character you think you can get access to, kind of like Max alluded to before, it's unlikely anyone on this call is getting President Trump for their documentary, or Beyonce for their documentary, or Drake for their documentary. It's a little bit more likely that they're going to get their next door neighbor who happens to own the bodega, to do their documentary, or that they're going to go into their local hardware store and find the guy that's had that business for 50 years and talk to them, or even just to ask your aunt and uncle. So I feel like there's this combination, especially when you're on a tighter timeline, of like, how ambitious can I be? How ambitious do I want to be? And how realistic is it that I'm going to be able to actually spend some time with this person? I think we'd all encourage you to be ambitious. I don't think we'd encourage you to write the White House. And there was one other thing I wanted to say about that. The joke that I kind of made as we were preparing for this seminar is, if you guys live in New York City, or if you live anywhere that has political candidates, we just get mailed mailers all the time where Deborah Messing is running for office in my neighborhood, or whoever it is. And I don't know, just email Deborah Messing's office and just ask her if you, a 15-year-old high school sophomore, could come make a 3-minute documentary about her. And you could go to Deborah Messing's office and you could film those 3 things we talked about before. You could film an interview with Deborah. You could film verite footage of her having a meeting with her street team that's going to go out and pass out flyers. And you could film B-roll of all the different cool things on her walls and edit that into a documentary about her goal, which is, win the election, right? Like that's a really easy documentary that's ambitious. It's like finding a stranger to talk to, but it isn't so ambitious that you're going to get turned down. Or even if you do get turned down, it's going to be all that kind of like disappointing. So yeah, I think it's about balancing interesting and accessible as you choose the subject for your film.
All right. Well, thank you, Will. Thank you, Andrea. That's all the sort of instruction we have. We'd love to take questions. But before we do, I just want to remind everybody that this is part of the Youth Free Expression Film Contest. And so if any of this has struck a chord or made you interested in making documentaries, please submit to the film contest. Return for the second and third workshops in this series. They are on June 6th and June 27th. Those are both also Saturdays. They are also at 3 p.m. Eastern time at the same time at the same Zoom link. So if you're interested in this, if you think that you've got maybe some friends who you might want to do this with, who maybe they're on the call or maybe they're not, bring them in. We will make this recording available so they can catch up and be all ready to go in time for the second workshop about how to shoot your film. I can't wait to see what everybody creates as they start their documentary film journeys. So I see already that we have a bunch of questions in the chat. I apologize for my rapid flipping through this PowerPoint.
I need to say one more thing just to live with myself. So at the same time, we're telling you like cameras are a passport and documentaries are a passport to go and explore whatever you want to explore. They can also make us feel bulletproof. So do make sure that you're not going somewhere with a camera that you wouldn't go without a camera. Like staying safe and, living to film another day is rule number 2. So that's it. No.
That's a great.
I can sleep now.
Yeah, and I'm not always as good at that. Okay, so first of all, I see that Celine has a question in the chat. She says, my documentary idea started from my mother's experience with cancer and her healing journey through both conventional and functional medicine. But while developing it, I realized the documentary is also about my own fear of death and my need to understand why we blindly trust systems when we are most vulnerable. I don't want the film to feel purely informative or like a debate about medicine. I want it to feel personal, emotional, and observational while still raising questions. How do you balance a personal, emotional journey with investigative documentary elements without losing the cinematic aspect of the film? Wow. Okay, that is a big question. So I'm going to pass it off to our esteemed guest hosts, Will and Andrea, to start.
Well, my one reaction to this, and I sort of already answered in the comments, is a documentary can be about all the things that you're describing. Like it can be emotional and factual and investigative and personal. Like it doesn't have to be one of those things. I will say, though, that like Gordon Quinn, I've talked about this place Potemkin a couple times now, but they're a famous documentary production company in Chicago. And Gordon, the founder, he always says, like, documentaries are really bad at information. They're really good at emotion. That like emotion is the thing that is easiest to convey on film. Sort of explaining how the medical industry works is really challenging to do and often sort of boring. So you probably want to lean into the most emotional parts of your story and lean away from the most dense informational parts of your story. Now, that isn't to say that like information isn't important, that like a way to make a documentary interesting to a broad audience is to bring people in with something that's really emotional, like your mom going through this fight with cancer, and then sprinkle in a little bit of like, and because we have a really crappy healthcare system in America, here's all these reasons why healthcare in America sucks, and here's why like that hurt my family. Like that's a way to make it feel a little bit more accessible to a broad audience. But yeah, usually like lean into emotion, lean away from information. Does that track for you, Andrea?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say like we don't have to have facts ever in documentaries. If you have them, make sure they're correct. But that's not. I agree with your guy there. Information's not really what people mostly want from documentaries. And when we watch movies for any reason, it's all about wanting to feel. And to try and make meaning out of things. I think you're going to get there by telling your mom's story, and probably whatever the issues are in the medical system that hit problem, that were a problem, you're going to hit as conflicts and obstacles and her goal to get well. So if you just tell her story, that stuff may be as evident as it needs to be. And often the docs are better at getting people to want to learn more, and go out and find the information in other ways. So I'm completely in alignment with Will. I'd say good questions are better than good answers. Like, people are way more interested in questions and exploration and you not giving an answer. Like, it's not your job to give answers. And heart is way more important than perfection. Like, just getting to the thing that matters to you, that has an emotional charge. That's the thing. If you make us feel, we will forgive you everything else.
Yeah, on this note, I was thinking about an anecdote. There's this woman, Starlee Kine, who's like a NPR type storyteller reporter. Used to work for This American Life, which is a famous storytelling radio show. And there's this anecdote about Starlee Kine where she was going into the office one day and she got into the elevator with a colleague. And you know how you talk to your friends at high school or your colleagues at work, and they sort of said like, "Oh, what'd you do this weekend?" She asked him that, and he said back to her like, "Oh, I made dinner with my girlfriend." And her follow-up question was, "Are you in love?" And like, that question got emotional really fast, right? It wasn't like, what were the ingredients? What did you make? What was the like dish that you guys were preparing? It was, are you in love? And in some ways, that's a thing you guys want to figure out how to do, which is have your second question be as emotional as possible. Yes, you might be asking about like, why does free expression matter? Why does democracy matter? But the follow-up question is like, yeah, but like, why does it matter for you? Like, why in your soul do you feel this thing? So yeah, I mean, that's back to this idea that emotion is way more important than information. And you'll even notice that as you edit things. Like, if you were to ask 10 people on the street, why does free expression matter? You're going to end up throwing out the 9 answers that are very like, well, I think that our country and our constitution, and like, you're going to end up choosing the one answer that was like, I was not allowed to speak growing up. And like, it was a miserable childhood because of that. I was never allowed to talk. I was never allowed to express my opinions. And now as an adult, like, the feeling of being able to share my thoughts on social media, online, blah, 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 like, that's going to be the answer you're going to end up keeping. So yeah, emotion, way more important than information.
Totally. Okay, we have another question in the chat from Giovanni, who asked, for this contest specifically, to what extent can we use copyrighted material if it's historically relevant or important? So this is getting at fair use, which is a great question and a big topic. The short answer is, the very short answer is that for this contest, you shouldn't worry very much about it. You can use what you want to use. We are certainly not going to report you to the copyright holder. This is not going to be monetized in any way. And so I would not concern yourself. The slightly longer answer is that there's a lot of case law and a lot of different opinions about this. Legally, you are allowed to use copyrighted material in your own sort of work if you are sort of materially transforming it and putting it in a different context and for a different purpose. And if you're not, I believe if you're not sort of materially like benefiting or kind of taking away from the audience of people who might otherwise pay for this thing. So it's a big question and something that if you want to sort of distribute a film more widely, you should definitely look into more. And I will definitely like to hear from our other co-hosts about this, but I realize I should have said this before, that we are moving through all of these things very quickly, right? We only have 90 minutes in each of these workshops. And so we're trying to do our best to kind of give you a broad general overview of how all these things work, but we are by no means exhausting any of these subjects. And so if you still have questions about them, definitely, you can either email me. My email is max@ncac.org, and ask me a question directly. I'd be happy to answer. You can also Google and find information about all this stuff online. I never went to film school. I never had any formal training about how to do any of this stuff. I mostly just Googled it and made mistakes and figured it out from there. And I think that that is a great way to learn how to make films. And so I would definitely recommend that you do that. But yeah, Will and Andrea, do you have fair use thoughts?
Ask a lawyer. Lee, like, don't take legal advice from anybody that's not a lawyer. Fair use is fantastic. I mean, actually, it would be a great thing to do a documentary about. I think it's one of the key parts of free expression in this country. So I urge you to engage with it, but it's the law and it's tricky. And like anything with the law, there's no simple or black and white answer. So ask a lawyer.
Yeah, I would like the question is well phrased in the chat here, which is, can we use copyrighted material if it's historically relevant or important? And like embedded in that is sort of fair use a little bit. I like a sort of simple version. I don't know, Lee is our dutiful lawyer here. I don't think you should use a Taylor Swift song in your documentaries. I think if you needed a photo of like a civil rights protest from the 1960s for your documentary, you're probably fine in this competition. And like, if you think of those as the two edges of the spectrum here, don't just grab a famous song and throw it onto your documentary. But if you needed some other archival materials to help tell your story, you're probably in a high school fair use okay situation.
Totally right. And Will, and I am a lawyer, but this is not legal advice to any individual one of you. This is just general information. Will, you hit on something really helpful, especially when it comes to documentaries. The concept of fair use, which says that you can't or you shouldn't be sued, or you should win if somebody sues you if you use copyrighted material, but there's this specific way you can use it that's entitled to fair use. And the word you want to keep in mind is transformative. Right. And that is the core of fair use, is a question of, are you using this in a different way? Right. If you're putting a Taylor Swift soundtrack in the back of your documentary, you're just using it because you want people to hear the music. That's not transformative. But if you are looking at a bit of news footage, or you're including a photo of a civil rights leader in order to analyze it, right, and put it as part of your thoughts or the making of your documentary, you're using it as a reference that is transformative inherently. So for this level of thing, it's probably just good to remember copyrighted music is almost never going to be fair use. But images, if you need them to tell your story and you're telling a fundamentally different story, you're not just regurgitating or replaying something else, visually, you're often going to have a fair use right to use those. So Max, that's the last question, right? Okay, yes. I just want to, if it's cool, I want to make one last comment to everybody. I know we're a minute over time, so thank you to everyone who stayed. I just want to say we've been really lucky to have Will and Andrea here. Andrea talked about this kind of magical week where someone flies in and by Saturday they're making a movie. Guys, that is exactly the kind of class that you could take if you got the New York Film Academy Scholarship for the first prize in this competition. Thank you so much, Andrea, for like rolling through this whole series with us. Will's documentary, I put it twice in the chat because I feel passionately about it. It's not only a phenomenal documentary, but it is fundamentally about free expression, and it has all the feelings and the emotions that he talks about. You can tell this guy has good taste. Go find his movie, watch the trailer. And then the final thing, which I'll put in the chat, is we at the National Coalition Against Censorship are unbelievably lucky to have Max working with us, because he's not just a program associate and an advocate for free expression. He's a filmmaker. So I put in the chat our YouTube channel for NCAC that includes some of Max's recent pieces, which themselves inherently grapple with democracy, in case you want to take a look at the kind of at a kind of exemplar of the stuff we do when we're talking about democracy, particularly through video. So I really just want to thank all of you so much for attending, for Will and Andrea and Max for doing such a wonderful job in hopefully encouraging all of you to use those rights and express yourself, and hey, enter the contest. We're so glad you all joined us here today.
Thank you, Lee. And yes, as Lee pointed out, we are at time. And so if you have somewhere else to be, we will not be offended if you have to leave. But I have seen a couple hands go up. And so I will stick around and answer any more questions that you have. Yeah, so yes, Angel, I saw your hand first. If you wanna go ahead and ask.
Thank you. I did leave it in the chat, but I understood that we were at time. So if there wasn't any time for it, I was just gonna let it go or send an email. But thank you for following up. So I was at EmojiCon in 2025, and a scholar who was paneling there said notably that the art is not the moment. When he said that, he was talking about the journey towards art not always being in line with the art. He brought up an anecdote about like trudging through mud in like he was in a swamp trying to make a comic or film a documentary or something of the sort. And that's why he said that the art is not the moment, because that didn't show up within the art. But in regards to documentary filmmaking, I feel like that might not always be the case. So how do you guys think that that phrase applies or does not apply?
Very philosophical. I think if I understand the question right, it is pretty applicable to documentaries, which is what's the kind of cliched phrase? It's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And I feel like that's definitely the case for documentaries, partially because there's no money in it. That like trying to get these things out into the world is never going to make you the same amount of money that you would make if you were on Marvel movies or Steven Spielberg movies. That like it's a pretty hard life to be a documentary filmmaker. But the reason you do it is it's like kind of the most amazing job in the world. You get to like go to cool places and ask people interesting questions. And you do transform while making a film just as much, if not more, than the characters in your movie. Like it really changes you in a way that you want the audience to. Like if you're trying to change your audience's mind about a topic and making a documentary, chances are you'll change twice as much while making the film. So yeah, I think some of this resonates with me.
I would say two things. One, it can be about the journey. I mean, if you decide to make a participatory documentary, then the documentary is the journey. And the other piece I would just mention is process. It's not necessarily going to be in the film if you make other kind of films, but to what Will was saying, like make sure you're just loving doing it and don't get yourself so tied in knots that you can't enjoy the process, because the process is what we have in docs. You know, I had a student who was nominated for an Academy Award a few years ago, and he had moved on and was shooting another film. He was in production, you know, deep sort of off the grid in Africa, and he called and said, "Do I have to go to the Oscars?" And I was like, "Oh, yes. First, yes. But second, I love this. I love that he is more interested in making the documentary than he is in going to, you know, bask in the laurels." And I would say, this is not about the contest you're doing here, but longer term, if you don't love the process, go do something else, because it may not be that the art is about the process, but your life is about the process.
Yeah. There's something in that like the human body does where after you give birth, you like forget, like you there's like a chemical or something that makes you forget the pain of it. And I think that making documentaries is a little bit like that, because it is often very stressful and difficult and hard. And then you finish it and you're like, I have to do another one. I have to do another one. I can't be idle. I'm itching, I'm jonesing. Get me back out there in the field. I think those are two great answers to this question. And so I'm going to give another slightly different one that I'm not sure is exactly what you were asking about, but I do think is worthwhile advice, which is, maybe it's more mundane, but you are the only person, or the people making the movie are the only people who kind of know the context and circumstances of the making of it, and this shot or this scene or this shoot day or whatever. And the more you can kind of forget that as you're editing it and just look at it for what it is, the better off you're going to be. So what I mean by that is, like, if you are like in the editing room and you're putting together the film and you've got this one like shot that took you hours to get, got up at the crack of dawn and you were waiting to see like a snow leopard emerge, and then like it took so much work and effort to get, and then you're like, it has to go in, because how could it not? Because I invested so much blood, sweat, and tears into it. Well, if it isn't actually going to work, if it's not the best shot for the film, then a really important thing to be able to do is kill your darlings and say, like, this is not, I need to do what's going to make the movie the best, rather than to sort of prove to myself that all of that blood, sweat, and tears was worth it. And on the other side of that coin, you might be out shooting and it's the end of a long day and there's been all this difficulty on set and with the production and technical malfunctions and it's not going the way you wanted it to, and you're stressed and you're tired and you're hungry and you just want to go to bed. And right before you pack up all your equipment, you see something and you just like point your camera at it, or you're like, fine, I'll go over there and I'll shoot it for 10 minutes or something like that. And you get it and you're like, whatever. And you stomp back and you break down your equipment and you go home. And then you look at it in the edit, and when you see that shot, all you can remember is how tired and angry and hungry you were. But it might be a beautiful shot, and nobody else is going to have that same negative association with it. And so even if it's kind of like an afterthought, or you didn't care about it, or it made you mad to get, or that might be actually one of the really compelling shots. And so being able to kind of look at your footage and your material with fresh eyes is going to get you very far as a filmmaker, I think.
All three of those answers were absolutely fantastic, all wildly different, and I do really, really appreciate all three of them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Angel. Muta here, I saw that you had your hand up earlier. Would you like to ask a question? Or do we have any more in the chat? If not, we can sign off here. Oh, another question in the chat from Lilu. This question pertains more to the contest itself and not the contents of the workshop, and for that I apologize. But will there be some sort of rubric by which the submitted film's quality will be evaluated? Yes, there is, but it is very basic and simple. The rubric basically asks the judges, there's a panel of 10 or 12 or so judges from NCAC and from New York Film Academy, as well as our guest hosts in these workshops, to think about how well it aligns with the sort of subject of the contest, documenting our democracy, the creativity involved in the films, and the sort of artistic quality or merit. So it's pretty simple, and it's not like a numbers-based thing. It's just kind of like, think about these three kind of general aspects of the film. And the top three films submitted will be chosen to receive an award. Thank you for the question. Good question. Okay, if anyone else would like to put a question in the chat or raise their hand and speak, by all means, go ahead. Otherwise, I think we are ready to wrap up our first film workshop here. So thank you all so much for being here today and spending your Saturday learning about how to get ready to make your documentary. Our next workshop will be in, I believe, 2 weekends, Saturday, June 6th at the same time, 3 p.m. Eastern time. So please come back and bring any more friends you might want to learn about how to shoot your film and everything related to that. We will be joined by Andrea again, as well as the filmmaker Jonathan Whitaker. If you have any questions in the meantime, please email me, max@ncac.org. I will distribute the recording of this meeting to everybody who's signed up for this workshop, and we'll also make it available on NCAC's YouTube channel. Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Will. Thank you, Andrea. Really appreciate all your time and attention, and good luck making movies out there.
It was a pleasure.
Good luck, everyone. Thank you.
Good luck.